everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 382 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I could not be more excited to continue sharing with you guys personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. Today, we are going to be talking about trusts, right? And specifically, what they are, how they work, and whether or not you may actually need one, okay? I know that something that often gets overlooked in our financial lives is our estate planning, right? And so I think it's important for us from time to time to go over things that are very valid, that are very useful in our estate planning and our financial lives, and see if these things are actually things that we should engage in, see if they are something that we need, and ultimately see if we have them, if they are actually useful to us or not, right? And I think trusts are something that we hear about often enough, and I don't think many people really know what they are. So I want to cover that in today's episode and help you guys to better understand one of the major estate planning documents. So stick around for a discussion of all that and more in this video. If you could, go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. And that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions. And you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual who's watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. Now, look, I know we've got enough things going on in our financial lives, right? We have enough complexities. We have enough problems. We have enough things that we may need to clean up. We have enough things that we may need to do, that we may need to follow up on, that we may need to get started on, right? But something that cannot be overlooked and should not be overlooked is our estate planning, right? We need to be able to take care of those around us and those that we love and those that we care for when we are gone. So we need to check this box. We need to get this thing done. We need to take care of our estate plans, right? And I'm not going to talk all about what your estate plan should look like and all those types of things, but I want to specifically talk about trusts today because I think trusts are a big part of people's estate plans, or if they're not, maybe they should be, right? Maybe you should have a trust. Maybe it would be something that's useful to you, right? It would help you to, properly plan for what's going to happen after you're gone with your finances and other parts of your life as well, okay? And so I want you to understand that trusts aren't just for rich people. Okay, that's a very common misconception, right? Yes, they can be useful to wealthy people, of course, right? We hear of trust fund babies, and when you hear of a trust, you just think somebody who's got a lot of money to be able to do this, right? But they can be an important part of estate planning and can provide peace of mind to you by ensuring your assets will go to the right people. You may say, well, doesn't a will do that? Well, we'll get to that here shortly, right? Now, here's what trusts are, how they work, basic differences between the living trust, the revocable trust, the irrevocable trust, and others, right? Yes, trusts can be complicated. And I think this is part of the reason why we don't know a lot about them is because they can be complicated and we kind of shy away from things that can be difficult from time to time, but that's okay, right? What I'm giving you, it is only an overview. Things can get far more complicated from here, and you should talk with an estate planning attorney, talk to your financial advisor, whomever, about the benefits of a trust in your specific situation, right? But let's just start off with what is a trust, right? If we're going to talk about it, we need to first define it. Well, a trust is a legal arrangement intended to ensure a person's assets eventually go to specific beneficiaries. It's very simple at the baseline level. At the baseline level, it's nothing more than an arrangement that's just saying, hey, your money, your things, they go to these people in these ways. Now, the person creating the trust, they put assets in the name of the trust and authorizes a third party to administer those assets for the trust creator and the beneficiaries, right? So if you want just the simple terms, the definitions, these are the three main players in a trust. There are three people or three groups in a trust, typically. First, there's the grantor, right? The grantor of the trust is the person who creates the trust and puts the assets in it. So if you have a trust, you are the grantor of said trust. Then there are the beneficiaries of the trust, right? And those are people who eventually receive some or all of the assets of the trust, right? They benefit from the trust having existed. And then there are trustees. Now, a trustee is an organization or person who administers the trust, right? They do what the trust says. And this may sound very familiar if you know anything about wills, executors of wills. It's very similar, right? The trustee, though, is going to enact the trust and have it occur in the way that the grantor wanted it to be done. Now, the main purpose of a trust is to transfer assets from one person to another, like I said a moment ago, right? Now, trusts can hold different kinds of assets, investment accounts, houses, cars, most assets that you could think of, a trust could hold it. Now, one advantage of a trust is that it usually avoids having your taxes go through probate when you die. Okay, and you may say, well, what in the heck is probate and why in the world should I care? Well, probate is a part of the court system that is tasked with deciding whether your will is valid if you have a will, and then distributing your assets. And I don't know about you, I don't want other people deciding about my assets. I don't want them distributing my assets. I would love to have the say of who gets my assets, how, when, and why, and not have to leave it up to the court to decide, why something occurs, how something occurs, or whatever, right? But that's exactly what will happen in a situation where you don't have any type of estate plan. You don't have a will, you don't have a trust, right? Yes, the probate court may see whether a will is valid, but they will also decide where your assets go if you don't have any type of will or trust in place, which is something that we don't want. And ultimately, this process, this probate process, it can take several months, and it is all public record. And both of those things may not sound very positive to you, right? So this may be one reason that a trust may be useful to you. Now, in general, I'm the type of guy, I like to give you just general pros and cons, right? I like to give you why things may be good, why things may be bad, because if we can see that, then we can at least make a partially informed decision with the information that we have. Now, what are the advantages of a trust, right? Well, first off, a trust gives you control. And I don't know about you, I like control, especially of my finances. And I think most people do. Most people do like to have control over their financial life. Now, what you can do based on this control that's given with the trust is that you can specify the terms of the trust, which means a trust can help you be strategic if you want to protect assets after a divorce, for example, or control when the kids get your money, or control how people spend the money that you leave them, all these different types of things, right? Because the beauty of a trust is that it gives you say beyond the grave, right? It gives you say of what is happening in the financial life of your beneficiaries beyond the grave. And this is pretty cool, right? Now, it can also lead people to be extremely controlling to a point where it's a bit unreasonable. But for example, right? I know Shaquille O'Neal. We all know who Shaq is, right? He has this thing with his kids, and I don't know if it's written out in a trust, but it definitely could be. And my guess is it probably is, right? But he has this thing with his kids that if you don't get at least 2 degrees, so like a bachelor's and a master's degree, right, then you don't get any of my money, right? And so that would be legitimately something that you could put in a trust. You could put in a trust that your kids don't get any of your money, any of your assets, until they have achieved 2 college degrees. That would be perfectly fine, perfectly legitimate. That's your stipulations for that money. That could definitely happen, right? You could, say that your kids can't get the money until they're 30 years old, or until they have kids, or they can only use the money, for, their kids' education, or for their home or for whatever, right? And that way you can keep others from just being frivolous with the money that you ultimately left them. So this level of control can be quite extreme, but at the same time, it can be very, very good, and it can protect others from making bad decisions. It can protect those who may otherwise have made bad decisions from making bad decisions with the money that you leave. Now, the second advantage of a trust is privacy. Assets in a trust do not have to go through probate, like I said a little while ago. Now, that process is public record, which can create drama if you're disinheriting someone or making distributions that you don't want to be public, right? Nobody likes that process, especially of disinheriting someone, right? Someone who maybe used to be a beneficiary but is no longer a beneficiary, maybe because of their misbehavior or because of something else that they've done in their life, right? And that's not something that you necessarily want to have made public record, okay? You don't want that person knowing that you did that or someone else knowing that you did that or whatever, right? But if you have a trust, you don't have to worry about that. You can change the trust and not have to worry about those changes becoming public record, and they don't have to go through that probate process and do all that. So privacy there is valuable, especially if there are some messy situations with you and the people that you have inheriting your assets. Then another advantage of a trust is time, okay? Again, probate can take several months. Trusts can avoid probate and get assets to your heirs faster. Why would you not want that, right? Why would you not want more immediacy in the distribution of your assets to your beneficiaries? I'm sure they would like that, and I'm definitely sure that you would as well. So that is a big benefit specifically to them, but it can also keep your financial plan moving forward, right? Because that's a problem, and this is just a quick aside. A problem that I think a lot of us have is that we may have a good financial plan, but that plan cuts off at death, right? It cuts off at the point where we're no longer here. And I understand why. I understand why you have that type of thought process. But ultimately, with a trust, right, your financial plan can go beyond you even being here, right? Your financial plan can go on as long as the trust insists that it does. And as long as your money continues to exist, then of course it can continue on, right? So I think that we have to change our view. I think we have to change the way that we think about our financial lives, the way that we think about, setting money aside for our kids and for our grandkids and for, whatever, right? We need to be a bit more thoughtful and think further, right? Think with a longer time horizon, and know that, hey, if I have a trust, not only can I think with a longer time horizon, I don't have to have, this pause in my time horizon. I don't have to have this pause in the timeline of my financial life through this probate process. Everything can just continue in the way that it is supposed to go. So time is a big advantage of a trust, okay? Then another advantage of a trust is the potential tax savings, right? Some types of trusts can lower your estate taxes. Okay, now anytime people hear lower taxes, they perk up, right? Because who the heck likes paying taxes? Not me. I don't think anybody really likes it, right? But it's a necessity. But you may have a way legally that you can decrease the taxes that are left behind. So certain types of trusts can help to lower your estate taxes. We'll talk a little bit more about that. However, most people don't have to pay estate taxes, right? Most people don't have a large enough estate to necessitate estate taxes in the first place, right? So if you're just thinking to set up a trust just to save on estate taxes, well, maybe you don't have to pay any anyway, right? So don't do it unnecessarily just for that particular benefit. Now, those are some of the advantages. What are some of the disadvantages of a trust? First disadvantage, I think, is the cost, right? It is costly to set up a trust, right? And then to maintain that trust, because it's not just setting it up once with an attorney and it's over, that's it, right? But it's the constant revisiting and going back and making sure that everything is the way that you want it, and your financial life changing, and you funding the trusts in different ways, right? An estate attorney can do the paperwork involved in setting up a trust and transferring your assets into the trust. But as we all know, attorneys are not cheap. And again, the more complex your situation is, and the more things that have to be added to the trust over time, the more work that attorney has to do for you, and the more costly it's going to be. But I think for a lot of people, the cost is fractional if you think about the benefit that can be offered over a long period of time, especially if you end up being somebody who it would have to pay estate taxes in the first place. Then I think the cost could be minimal to decrease and minimize those taxes over time, right? So cost, I think, is a very big thing. But just to get one set up and just to get one started, the cost is still relatively high, regardless of the ongoing costs of maintaining your trust. Then another disadvantage is time, right? You'll need to spend time dealing with the paperwork, and you may have to have uncomfortable conversations about who gets what and when and why and how, right? It's going to take time, and it should take time. It shouldn't be something that you do in a very short amount of time. This is something that you should think about. It's something that you should really have long discussions with your spouses, have discussions with your beneficiaries. Talk to them about why you're doing what you're doing, why you're putting certain things in place. Don't just blindside them with your trust or your will or whatever, right? That's kind of a pretty good rule for your estate plan in general. Don't just blindside people with things when you're gone, right? Have discussions of what the trust says. Have discussions of what the estate planning documents are, laying out. And then ultimately there can be no surprises there. And people can just, know what to expect and move on with life from there, even if it may be a little bit uncomfortable. But you need to take the time. You need to do all the proper things to make sure your trust is set up in the way that you want it to be. Then another disadvantage is that it may not be necessary for tax reasons. Again, some people can indeed save on estate taxes with certain trusts, but most estates aren't subject to estate taxes in the first place. So that's just reiterating the fact that, hey, the tax advantage that some of the big boys make or the big girls make when it comes to, and when I say big boy, I'm talking about very wealthy people, right? The tax advantages that they get from a trust, you may not get the same type of tax advantages because you may not owe estate taxes in the first place, okay? Now, those are the pros and cons, but let's talk about some types of trusts, okay? So what is a living trust? That's a term that you may hear kicked around and that we need to understand. These are also known as revocable or revocable, however you want to say it, right? Potato, potato, trusts, right? Now, in these trusts, you can change the beneficiaries and assets as long as you're alive and physically and mentally able to do so. Okay, so you can always make changes to living trusts, which is cool, right? You can go back and change things as situations change and add assets or take assets out or whatever, right? You can even name yourself as the trustee and name a co-trustee or successor trustee, right? So specifically for a trust in which assets are going to go out of the trust in your lifetime, right? Then you can be the trustee of those assets, and then other people who you designate, they can be the trustee once you are passed away. Now, if you're diagnosed with a debilitating condition or whatever, you can get things in order before you're unable to do so. And then when the day comes, the successor trustee can take over and manage the trust for you, right? So it sounds really beneficial. It sounds like a really good idea. You can get stuff set up. You can change things if you need to. But then one day when you're no longer able to, or when you're gone, then the trustee that you want will take things over and make sure that your trust is enacted in the way that you wanted it to. Now, that's a living or revocable trust. What about an irrevocable trust, right? An irrevocable trust, you can't change your mind, okay? You cannot revoke it, right? Irrevocable, okay? You cannot change your mind. Once you put assets in the trust and name a beneficiary, it is permanent, okay? Now, you may say, well, why in the world would anybody ever do this? Just hold on, right? Now, you need to make sure you know whether an irrevocable trust is right for you. Now, an advantage of an irrevocable trust is that you might be able to reduce your estate taxes, right? The assets in an irrevocable trust technically are not yours. The trust owns them. You may say, okay, what do you mean here? The trust owns them. So let's just think about what happens here for a second, right? The grantor, right, the person who creates the trust, gives up ownership of the assets when they are put into the trust, right? And so that is removed from your taxable estate. Okay, so if it's removed from your taxable estate, then you don't have to pay estate taxes on that money. Now, irrevocable trusts are often used as a vehicle to facilitate advanced tax planning and gifting for one's estate. Of course, if you want to give a gift and you know exactly who and exactly how much, exactly how, then of course it would be beneficial, especially if you have a large estate. It would be extremely beneficial to get those assets out of your name and to put them into the irrevocable trust and just have it acted out in the way that you wanted to over time, but not have to pay taxes on that part of your estate, or not have to leave your beneficiaries with taxes to pay on your estate, at least with those assets. Okay, so they can be beneficial. They can also be beneficial for other things like health care and like long-term care and things like that. But we're not going to get into all that. You just need to know what an irrevocable trust is and that basic advantage of taxes and the help there. Okay. Now, what other types of trusts are there? Well, there are many different types of trusts that can be tailored to your needs. Okay. So here's a few examples. First is an education trust. Beneficiaries can only use the money for educational expenses. There's a spendthrift trust, right? When beneficiaries can't make good financial decisions for themselves, the trustee decides how the beneficiary is allowed to use the money. So you have a bit more control there. There's also a charitable trust. This is an irrevocable trust from which assets go to one or more charities. So again, if you have a very large estate, this can be a very beneficial way to give money away. You set up this irrevocable trust, you no longer have ownership of the assets, and so it's no longer taxable under your estate. Okay. Then there's also a functional needs trust. Okay. So for families with children who have functional needs, these trusts set specific rules for how the money will go to the beneficiary. This can be extremely valuable as well. And then there's qualified personal residence trusts. So this is an irrevocable trust in which you can transfer a house to your heirs, but you get to live in it for a specific period first. Okay. So again, getting the assets out of your name to get them out of your estate taxes. Okay. Then there are generation skipping trusts, right? This is a trust in which you can transfer money to grandchildren or other people who are at least 37 and a half years younger than you. Very specific on the 37 and a half years, but that is the rule. Okay. So what about taxes and trusts? Okay. I've talked a little bit about taxes, but let's talk a little bit more. Okay. This is a complicated area of the tax code, right? So you definitely want to be sure that a CPA looks at this and that an estate planning attorney is on your side, right? But let's first talk about estate taxes. If you have a large estate, you may owe federal estate tax when you die. In 2020, the federal estate tax generally applies to a person when a person's assets exceed 11.58 million at the time of death. The estate tax rate can be up to 40%. Also, some states have their own estate taxes and their own estate tax thresholds, right? So there should be two estate tax bills to pay, one for the federal government and one to the state. So the trust can help you to decrease that estate tax burden if you are in the position to have such a large estate. And then inheritance taxes, right? Some states have inheritance taxes, which are different from estate tax. The people who inherit the money pay the tax. Okay, so that could be something that you have to think about when it comes to trusts as well. Income taxes, right? The assets in a trust might generate income, which could trigger income taxes or capital gains. Who pays that tax depends on who legally owns the assets. If a charity gets the income directly, that donation might qualify for a tax deduction. So just another benefit of a charitable trust and having a trust in place in the first place. And then time and effort, right? You may have some extra paperwork to do at the time of your taxes because trusts, they have to file their own tax returns, but it can still be beneficial to you potentially. Now, Am I suggesting that everyone should have a trust? Absolutely not, right? Some of the benefits of having a trust for some people get outweighed by the costs of doing so and the time and effort in doing so. Now, should everybody have a will? Absolutely, everyone should have a will. Even people who have trust should also have wills because they are not the same thing, okay? But even so, a large number of you should still consider getting trust. Now, what's the difference between a will and a trust? And I'll leave you with this in today's episode. So, just some comparisons between a will and a trust. A will is effected after one's death, but a trust is effective once it is signed and funded, right? So it can be effective immediately. Wills have no protection during incapacity. Trusts do, right? So if you were to be mentally incapacitated, but you already have the trust set up, you're all good, right? Wills do not avoid probate. Trusts do, right? Wills do not preserve privacy, but trusts do. Wills provide guardianship for minor children, right? So they can tell where your minor children are going to go and live if something were to happen to you or you and your spouse, right? Trusts do not do that, right? That is not a part of a trust document. Now, the process and costs for a will, it's pretty straightforward. Average cost ranges from $0 to $1,000, depending on the complexity and size of the estate and how it's created. You can do it yourself online for a very low fee and get it done very simply, right? So everyone needs a will, but a trust is a more complex process with more paperwork. Average cost for a simple trust is up to $1,500. Complex trusts have an average cost of around $3,000. So you see those costs, and that's just to get it all done and set up, not to continue, having to deal with it time and time again as you may want to make changes, okay? Now, wills are more likely to be successfully challenged, whereas trusts are less likely to be successfully challenged due to their ongoing nature. Wills are usually secondary to trusts, right? So trusts have precedence over wills, right, in what they say. Wills do not have tax benefits, but irrevocable trusts can. Again, revocable trusts don't have those tax benefits. Wills do not protect you from creditors. Revocable trusts do not either, but irrevocable trusts do. Okay, so if you have your assets in the irrevocable trust, you no longer own those assets, so the creditors can't come and take those assets if you were to owe money, right? So hopefully this helps you, right? Hopefully you get a better sense of what a trust is and how it may work, and you may want to learn more. That's absolutely fine. Like I said earlier, this is an overview. I'm not an estate planning attorney, right? But I understand a little bit of this stuff. I understand some of the benefits and how it may help you in your particular financial life. So I think it's something that we need to talk about. And estate planning is something that is uncomfortable. It's something that we want to kick the can down the road on. But ultimately, somebody's going to have to make those decisions. And I would rather it be you, and I would rather it be you deciding who does what and when and how and whatever with your money than some court system deciding what happens to your money instead, okay? So make the proper decisions for your financial life. I'm not saying everybody needs a trust. I'm not saying you should go out and get one today. But if you don't have a will, you need one, right? And then obviously, if your financial situation is in a place where you can benefit from a trust, you have adequate assets and or you have a more complex situation, then by all means, look into a trust, learn more, and potentially get one for yourself. So thanks for watching this video. If you could, go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions. And you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual who's watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. So tune in tomorrow as I continue talking about personal finance topics that I think can be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.